Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for joining us today as we're hosting the launch of the Doughnut for Urban Development Manual. My name is Leonora. I'm the Cities and Regions Lead at the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. My main role is to support local governments who are working with Doughnut economics, but I've also been talking and working with those in the built environment sector, exploring various ways to apply Doughnut economics in practice. So architects, planners, developers, engineers. So I'm very aware that there's been a lot of interest and a lot of innovation, a lot of thinking and excitement in this area. So I'm very happy today to be here for the launch of this already publicly available open source toolkit that the deal was involved with, but we didn't lead on, and we're happy to be joined here by those that did. So today's session will mostly be focused on hearing from the two co-editors of this manual, Kasper and Dani, who I'll introduce before they get started. They'll be sharing a presentation about the project, its background, the outcomes, learnings, and available tools and resources. And before we hand over to Kasper and Dani, I'd like to start by giving the word to my colleague and author of Doughnut Economics, Kate Raworth, to share a few reflections from herself and from Deal to get us started. Kate.
Thanks, Leonora. And yep, hello, everybody. It's great to be in this webinar. So I'm going to very briefly say that as Doughnut Economics Action Lab, we were really delighted to contribute to the creation of this tool and concept and manual. And for several reasons. One, it was a great team. There's that wonderful thing that happens when a concept like the tool of the Doughnut comes together with a mission-based company that actually wants to design something based on it, bringing together a lot of world-class academic and practice-based think tanks and organizations. So it was this wonderful mesh of people bringing expertise from very, very different directions that makes us look at it from all sides. Secondly, it was really great to jump into the Doughnut for Urban Development, thinking about this built environment context, because we know that at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, lots of people are wanting to use the tool in different kind of sectors, fashion, tourism, health, transport. And so we knew that what we create here will begin to set something of a pathway and a direction for others. And so it was really important for us to work together and do that well. And we really, really appreciate that the team we worked with agreed with us that what we've produced here, even though it's beautiful, this is not a finish point. It's not the end. It's not done. This is a start point. This is the beginnings of an approach. And it's very nicely explicit about there being lots of questions and ways where we're looking to find a way, but it's not claiming to be the definitive version. And that was really, really important for us as we got started. We're really pleased with some of the innovations that we worked on together in this, using the full lens Doughnut unrolled approach. So looking locally and globally, looking socially and ecologically, but also taking great care when we were looking at principles for allocation of access and use of planetary boundaries. We really, really appreciated that the team wanted to go beyond the standard principles of allocation that are used in a lot of ongoing work and root it in human rights and sufficiency. And so there's some innovation there, again, recognizing that it's not a job done, but we are moving in that direction. And what happens when we challenge ourselves to start there? And then the last thing I'll add is that we were really pleased that the team also shared with us the recognition that it's important not just to design the buildings and the built environment we create, but to think about the design of the companies that create them. For Deal, it's very, very important always to think about the purpose of a company, its networks, how it's governed, how it's owned, and how it's financed. And so it was really clear to us when the team said, absolutely, we care about that too. It changes who we are, it makes the company. We want to write about that in the manual as well. So for all of these reasons, it's been a real pleasure to collaborate, and I'm going to hand over to the team to talk us through what we've actually created together. Thanks.
Thanks, Kate. I'll just to get us started. So we'll have a 30-minute presentation now, leaving us around 20 minutes or so for questions. So please use the Q&A at the bottom of the webinar for any questions, and we'll try to get to as many as possible or answer them in the chat. So I will now pass on the ball to our friends who worked so hard on these projects, the co-editors of the manual, Kasper Guldager and Dani Hill-Hansen.
Thanks, Leonora.
Sorry, just to read, I have the YouTube link at the same time. So my apologies that I didn't introduce you before. So Kasper is a sustainability pioneer. He's an architect and a writer. He's recently joined the dark side as a real estate developer, his words, not mine, as he co-founded Home.Earth with the aim to make people and planet positive homes. And Dani Hill-Hansen is a sustainable design engineer and architect working at Effect Architects. And in her role as project manager, she facilitates collaborative transition projects, bridging the gap between climate science and building industry activity. So on to you, Kasper, and yeah, floor is yours.
Thanks, Leonora. Yeah, great honor to be here, and I've been looking forward to this day. So have Dani. I'll start with a 10 minutes fly-in on the Doughnut for urban development, and then I'll leave the floor to Dani. Well, also I know a lot of the other co-creators are in this call, so good to have us all here. So the Doughnut, I mean, I'm just starting out introducing myself. I'm an architect by training, and as just said, I've recently become a real estate developer, and that's also the main focus of the tone of the book is how can we address the Doughnut economics for urban developments. I myself have done a number of sustainable buildings in the past, but also sustainable writings, and I see this book very much standing on the shoulders of other frameworks. So I did in 2013 a manual on how to practice cradle to cradle with Bill and Michael, and also how to think about the value of sustainability through circular economy. And now with this publication, how can we take the thinking and the principles of Doughnut economics together with Kate and her team, and then also pair it with the science of the planetary boundaries into this, you can say, manual that talks about how to practice Doughnut in urban developments. So it is it's been a real pleasure and honor to go from the known framework and being able to then do a sector deep dive on how to translate the planetary or ecological ceiling and the social foundation into how we in the publication puts forward this kind of wheel of social actions and also a wheel of ecological actions. So it's very practice focused with a lot of examples. This also was, as Kate mentioned, the collective efforts of a dream team. Very thrilled not just to have a sounding board, but a motherboard of Doughnut Economic Actions Lab and the Stockholm Resilience Center. We could not talk about Doughnut economics or planetary boundary without. Then the rest here is showing the remaining partners. I'm just, since it's a lot of work go through, like Home.Earth, Danish Technological University, and also Built, who actually writes building codes at LCA frameworks in Denmark, Effect Architects, Vandkunsten Architects, Vego Engineering, SLA Landscaping, and then Green Building Council Denmark. All of this supported by Real Dania, a Danish philanthropic foundation. We have a number of contributing experts. We have Dani and myself as lead editors, but maybe the most important are the 20 co-creators. And my support is with Dani, so she is highlighted here. Well, for the book, it was really important to get together physically. We did this in 3 occasions in these kind of 2 days workshops in London and in Stockholm and in Copenhagen, and then we inaugurated the physical book early summer, and now we are doing a global launch of the Doughnut for Urban Development today. So having the manual, the publication, it starts with an introduction by Kate, and it then unfolds, you can say, the Doughnut for Urban Development throughout, and is available for free download here on the Deal website. And it's not only the book that we'll present today, it's also a scientific appendix, additional 100 pages of literature references and fold-outs of content. It's also a database where the tools are getting unfolded. Dani will elaborate on that. And also today is the inauguration of the Toolkit, the supportive workshop kit to come about exercising the content of the book. So unfolding the chapters, I'll actually leave this for Dani, but I would like to focus on the last chapter. I think also Kate mentioned it in her intro, the Doughnut Design for Business. Doughnut Design for Business is, to me, something that I were not very aware of in the beginning. You need to challenge business. You need to rethink business. A company that's done that is Airbnb for the built environment, with the huge implications of making passive square meters active, but also with the counter, you can say, benefits, rising up price in certain neighborhoods, in enabling people to access living. So there's also counter movements, and it's all down to the business model. The Airbnb is a platform taking some of the same principles, but reinvesting some of the revenue into the local communities. So it's very much about challenging the old thinking into a new thinking. In this chapter, we are unfolding that into the built environment. Beyond that, there are several new contributions for this book. I think to the built environment, it is a new dimension to think about the social consequences and the social impact, not just on-site, but also off-site throughout the value chain. It's also new to be able to talk about how we allocate the planetary resources from relative to absolute targets. And this is where the team of allocation in the group have put forward the new allocation principle sufficiency. As shown in the diagram, it's about putting a budget to your building, and it's going from a global budget to a national budget, but even down to a square meter budget, backtracking the planetary boundary. Also, we have found out with our work in collaboration with the Stockholm Resilience Center that the 9 planetary boundaries are, you can say, clustered around 2 core boundaries or 2 core planetary systems. It's climate stability and healthy ecosystems. So by addressing, you can say, climate change and biodiversity at first hand, you are also indirectly addressing the other planetary boundaries. On the biodiversity, it's again something where you need to divide your focus from having an on-site focus, what happens on your lawn, in your backyard, and how can you increase nature, but also the consequences of the value chains derived biodiversity impact needs to be measured. And in the collaboration, we also put forward tools of how to actually measure the off-site biodiversity impacts, which accounts for more than 80% of the biodiversity impact. So here it is on screen, and here is my dear colleague and co-editor, Dani. Over to you.
Thank you, Kasper, and thank you, Leonora, for the introduction. We can go to the next slide, Kasper. Just to give you a little background about me, as Kasper did, I have 2 starting points before coming into this project that kind of anchored me in the Doughnut for Urban Development. One was a game that I created with some classmates at Aalborg University in 2021 that you can find on the Deal website, that's called Economisch. And we were design students trying to understand macroeconomics and found out that the language was inaccessible and the concepts were not based on reality. And this is the first time I met the Doughnut and had a big aha moment about how global macroeconomic paradigms have to do with everything. And this is a starting point for all of our issues. And this is a tool you can actually go and learn about these systems. And then the second starting point for me is a project called Reduction Roadmap that I'm engaged with here at Effect, where we have worked to set planetary boundary reduction targets for the Danish building industry that align the building legislation, LCA, with Paris Agreement. And we're actually in the middle of a campaign now trying to have the Danish building legislation reflect planetary limits. So these are my starting points and a little background about what I do. I will go through the book by chapter, just talking about some of the concepts and how they relate to the building industry. I think most people in the call have a relationship to donut economics, so I won't try to explain the core concepts in depth, but how we have worked with them in this publication. Yes. The starting point, of course, is the donut, where we have the social foundation on the inside and the ecological ceiling on the outside. On the right-hand side, you can see the overshoot donut. On a global level, we are overshooting all of our social boundaries, and we are today overshooting 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries. This means we need to fundamentally change the way we design the world, and the building industry has a massive impact on global resource use and carbon emissions. So we have a really big responsibility. If the building industry does not move towards the social foundation, society cannot. Next. We have the Doughnut for urban development, which is more or less the same as the original Doughnut. We have reorganized the social foundation in the center by principles that are connected to the EU taxonomy. Actually, the inclusivity, equitable, responsible, and connected are terms that you will find there as a starting point for social impact assessment. And on the outside, as Kasper said, we have the 9 planetary boundaries, which we have actually added a layer looking at the 2 core systems, climate stability and healthy ecosystems. So the Doughnut for urban development has a strong relationship with the original Doughnut. We didn't dare change too much there. When we look at design in the building industry, I think we are much more familiar with the idea of going away from degenerative to regenerative design. We have a lot of tools, a lot of frameworks, a lot of design strategies to think about regenerating our world, or at least being resource efficient. And I think what we've added to the discussion in this book when it comes to the ecological ceiling is a focus on biodiversity and how to work with nature in the design. And then when we come to the idea of moving away from divisive economies to distributive, this is new for the building industry. This is where I think we are most challenged by our existing paradigms, and where we learn the most as a project team to think about how the purpose and the role of developers must change so that everyone who helps create value for a developing company actually benefits from the value created. So these 2 core design principles help steer us towards the Doughnut for urban development solutions. Within that, we have zoomed in now looking at the 4 lenses. These are based off of the 4 lenses framework from Deal. And basically, I think the major addition here to the frameworks we already have in the building industry is the global lens. To some extent, when we use life cycle assessment and look at the impact of our buildings and materials, we have an idea about how we impact ecology and the environment in other places, but we have really neglected the global social lens in our industry. And this is where we have dived into the most new material and where we are most challenged given our existing systems. Yes, next. When we look at that in practice, in the building industry, we're pretty good at thinking about the social impact within design and urban development on site. We think about how people are as architects and designers, We think about shaping society so that it benefits people and maybe the nearby community, but we don't often extend those same dignities to people around in the global supply chain. So what we need to do now is actually consider all the people who are impacted by every process of more or less the materials that go from around the globe into a site somewhere in Europe. And it's a complex pursuit in our global economy to find out exactly who is impacted, but it's a pursuit worth trying. On the right-hand side, we have the same idea where we have the on-site framing of a building project. We usually are pretty good at measuring and understanding the impact of what happens on a building site, but we rarely understand the full impact along the material value chain. But today we have pretty robust tools for life cycle assessment that are really good for carbon emissions and understanding the full carbon impact of a building project. And with this project, we are adding some new contributions where we have some new approaches for looking at the biodiversity impacts, both on-site and off-site, where we earlier have kind of focused just on the on-site. So we're expanding the scope of our problem solving with the Doughnut for Urban Development. Moving into the social foundation, we had a feeling, you could go to the next one, with this book, that we might be able to set the same precise measurable targets for the social foundation as we could do for the ecological ceiling in some sort of absolute terms. And what we found out was that that's not even desirable to do, and that social impact is quite context specific. What we've also found out in this process is that there is a hierarchy of the Sustainable Development Goals, and oftentimes we see them as, you know, equal and separate from each other, but in fact, social impact is dependent, or social well-being is dependent on ecological well-being, and business is a function of society. So we can redesign it to serve the purpose of social well-being and planetary well-being, but we have to prioritize that. And this is the chapter 5 that both Kate and Kasper talked about. When it came to setting impact assessment for the social foundation, we based the framework and scaling on the EU taxonomy, minimum safeguards, do no significant harm, and substantial contribution definitions. Knowing that this is a framework that most of Europe is going to have to deal with, we tried to use these definitions as part of the way we move the social foundation towards regenerative contributions. Here we have the social foundation for urban development. In the center, you have the original social goals of the Doughnut, and on the outside, you have impact areas. We have, for example, if we look at food, it has both local and global impact areas. So we have 24 local and 24 global impact areas within the social foundation. When it came to looking at different frameworks that are already dealing with social impact assessment, had a lot of things in the local space, but when we came to global impact is where we had to push ourselves to discover some new ways of measuring and considering social impact. We can go on. The book is set up as a manual. We've tried to create it in a way that it's a tool that you can actually use. So we take the wheel and we divide it into 4 pages or 4 spreads where you have a quadrant discovered at a time. And we define the local impact area and give a example indicator for one way of measuring this social impact area. And behind this, we'll come back to it. We have a whole database explaining where the impact area came from, which frameworks already have it, and where you can find some references for this. In addition to the impact areas, we've also tried to contextualize some of the impact areas with existing examples of urban development that we believe live up to some, not all, but some of the social impact that we strive for in the future. This is a project called Tingbjerg Houses, and it's designed by Venkonsen and SLA, who are both partners on this project. It's developed by a handful of developers in collaboration, and it's an exciting project that actually revitalizes an existing area that's low income and has had a lot of social issues. The exciting thing about the project is design is great, that's nice, but it's also a system for how people access the housing. So you can, the price point is lower than average. There is a whole interview process, so they make sure that the right types of people can access the housing, right being broad demographic. You're obligated to stay in the housing for 5 years. If you sell your housing before the 5 years, you actually have to pay half of the profit back to the developers. So we're really trying to build community in a new way that challenges a typical development paradigm. Moving on, we go to the ecological ceiling. And this is a bit more complicated, you could say. The ecological ceiling is based on the planetary boundaries, which we have on the left side. And one of the big discoveries for us was that, okay, these planetary boundaries are not actually separate from one another, but the way we behave and the way our society is designed impacts these different planetary boundaries. And in fact, they are not equal to each other. Climate change and biodiversity are core systems that we need to focus on. To understand this, we have a diagram that we borrowed from some researchers at Stockholm Resilience Center. And this more or less illustrates this point that on the top, we have ecological systems, and two of them are core: climate stability, looking at carbon reduction, and healthy ecosystems, which relates most directly to biodiversity loss and land use and our oceans. And on the bottom, we have human systems and how we design things impacts the natural systems and vice versa. So we are in a system with nature, and we can either design that system to benefit and restore nature, making sure that we have a strong social foundation, or we can continue on the path we're on that's putting pressure on these systems. The ecological ceiling of the Doughnut for urban development is structured differently than the social foundation. So we have 12 local climate stability impact areas. These are dealing mainly with design, how we actually design a building. And then we have the global features, which are mainly dealing with emissions into the atmosphere and carbon reduction. On the bottom half of the diagram, we have healthy ecosystems, which is also set up to have 12 local and 12 global impact areas. And these are dealing more with nature. So restoring nature and using nature to benefit this site. This part of the book is designed the same way. We've taken the same format to sort of build up the experience of going through the wheel and understanding the different impact areas. And here we've included cases as well. It's really important to say there are no projects that live up to the Doughnut. We don't have that yet. But again, we do have some projects that do some things well. This is a project called Living Places, which my office Effect has participated in with our collaborators, Felix and Artilia and Inemark and Peterson. And this is a project that reduces carbon emissions by 2/3 using building materials that are already on the market. And what's interesting about the project is, one, it's open source, but two, it used life cycle assessment as a tool for process and carbon reduction. So it challenges the standard way of developing a project by using informed decision making. It's a good example for that. In the fourth chapter, we get into some of the more complex and science-based part of the book. I think it's really important to say in this part of the book, we have a 100-page document behind the book that goes deep into the science we present in this book. So we have tried to shorten it down, use regular language, and communicate some really complex sciences in a brief way. I'm not going to go deep into this, but in this part of the book, we do the same thing for the planetary boundary for climate change and for biodiversity, where we go from a global level down to a building level, and we explore different ways of allocating a carbon budget. And we take two different approaches for measuring healthy ecosystems and biodiversity. I think these are the chapters you have to spend the most time with to understand, and engage with the appendix that is behind the book to really understand what tools are available, what's important to avoid, and where we are as an industry. That we don't have this perfected yet, but we're moving in the right direction of applying absolute science in our building processes, which is a really big step to scaling building impact within planetary boundaries. But we're just getting started the last few years, so it's all new. If we were to condense down the entire book, then this is from my opinion, okay? To be fair, if we were to condense it down into 3 things we do. When we look at the planetary side of things, the ecological ceiling, we need to use absolute carbon budgets on our building projects. We need to set biodiversity targets for on-site and off-site impact. Ideally, there are no species lost as a result of our building. We are really, really far away from that happening. And we need to do transparent social impact assessment for both what happens locally and globally. And transparent here is the key word, because we are just starting to collect the right type of data on social impact assessment. And it means that we need to be bold in the approach. We need to be honest about where we are, and we need to be transparent with the different collaborators that we work with about what the real impact of our projects are. Behind the book, we have a lot of tools. We'll just go through these quickly. As mentioned, we have the appendix, which is about a 100-page document that is a scientific basis for the planetary science research and stuff in the book. It's formatted completely differently. Each chapter is its own universe and language. So it's a different object than the book, but a really, really important counterpart to understanding the material in the book. Then we have a database. This is an Excel file. You can download. What it does is it expands upon the impact areas in the book. It includes references for these impact areas. It identifies existing building frameworks that deal with the different impact areas, and it points to resources and tools that are already on the market that will help you understand these impact areas better. The ambition is that people download it and you use this as a starting point for your impact assessment, but that you actually build on it. And we have the LCA biodiversity impact tool. What's really exciting about this tool is it's first of its kind. It is in a beta version. It includes an extensive YouTube tutorial for how to install it, how to use it, what's important to know. In general terms, it measures impact and species loss per year. At the moment, you need to have access to a EcoInvent or a like database so that you have the right data plugged into the tool. It measures both direct impact, so what happens on your building site, but also the indirect impacts which happen off-site. And it calculates for over the full lifespan of the building using LCA. So you get a really clear picture of the impact of your building project. I don't think we'll go deep into this one right now. There's a lot of resources to understand it. Finally, I will just go through the latest addition to the materials that we have created behind the manual. We have been working on this at Effect with some new faces, which is why I've added them. Juliana and Jeppe were not a part of the book team, but have been helping me over the last 2 months develop this toolkit, which is workshop material to help unpack the donut. And go to the next one. It's important to say I included that slide because Dani gave us extra funding. We found out through the process of the book and the creation of it that the workshops we did together and the collaborative process that we went through was really, really essential to understanding the core principles of donut economics and the material behind the book. And we realized that the book would be incomplete if it didn't have something to facilitate a similar process and workshop. It's available already on the website, so you can download it and use it. There's a link in the bottom right corner. And essentially the workshop is divided into 3 parts. And it has a lot of materials with it. Again, you're not going to meet this book and fully understand everything or be able to apply it. You need to invest some time. It's the same thing with the workshop material, that you will need to invest some time to fully unpack it and be able to apply the principles in the right way. So we suggest doing it over a two-day workshop session. You can go to the next one. It's divided into 3 core parts. We have an introduction. This is a slide deck that goes through the core principles of donut economics. What we presume is that the person facilitating the workshop has found the book. And they say, yes, we need to do this. I want my organization to rock with the donut. And then they need to get their organization on board, right? So they are going to facilitate a workshop. So we've prepared an introduction for the organization to kind of understand the material of the book. Then there's a second part where we've created discussion cards that dive deeper into the concepts of the book. And then we have a third part where you actually begin applying it and figuring out how we go from the concept to action. As I mentioned, there's a lot of material. There's a how-to guide for facilitators that gives detailed instructions for how to actually lead a workshop, what you need to know, how you can prepare, who should be involved, all the details. As mentioned, there's the discussion cards that facilitate discussion and questions around the core concepts. There's a few matrices that you can actually fill out as a team. Of course, you have access to the manual. And then we have printable versions of the impact areas and the social and ecological impact wheels that are easily accessible in a workshop. And I think actually it's not part of the workshop, but it's something we found out is necessary. So we've added it to the material. We both have a letter to practitioners and a letter to C-level management. And these 2 letters give a very short introduction to why organizations or why project teams should work with the donut. So it gives context for the sustainability frameworks and changes that are happening on a European level and how this tool can actually help you meet some of those criteria for like EU taxonomy, for example. And then the letter to practitioners is offering some practical advice about what type of tender you might want to use for your building project, and what other additional frameworks you might need, like a code of conduct for consultants and due diligence process to make sure that the people you work with on a project where the donut is the value will help you. Yes, this is just the second part of the workshop, is to dive deeper. You can go to the next one. And there's 2 types of discussion cards. On the one hand, it's core concepts. And then on the other, there's 3 that talk about setting these really important targets for the project. The third part is actually about taking the concepts that you've learned and figuring out how you're going to apply them in an actual project or at an organizational level. And there's 2 steps. One is we use the donut, the 4 lenses to actually figure out where you are as an organization. How are you dealing with the local and global social and ecological aspects of your projects? What we believe will happen when an organization does this is that they have been mainly focused on local considerations, and that they actually need to shift their focus to global considerations. But it's to take status of where you are and sort of reconcile that maybe we've been doing a really good job based on an old approach, but if we want to jump into the future and apply core donut thinking, that we need to have some new focuses. And then we have a concept to action matrix, where we actually have people go like fill this out in a workshop together, where you go from where do you want to go? So what are the targets? Where are you now? This is the 4 lenses exercise. What could block your actions? What's currently in the way of transforming your organization? What could unlock your actions? So what are some things that are on the way or that you want to achieve as a company that will help you kind of move in the right direction? And then I think most importantly is the first step. We're asking people to reframe the entire approach to urban development with this manual. And sometimes the first step is the hardest. If you try to take on the whole thing at once, it can maybe be overwhelming. But if as an organization, you can figure out what's the most important first step we take on this journey together in a workshop? That will be a huge, huge success. And that's that. I think I chose this quote to wrap it up because I think it's sort of the core of the Doughnut and the core of the Doughnut for Urban Development, that we need to move away from an approach where we're looking at reducing our negative impact and change our approach so that we are focused on positivity and figuring out how urban development can be a part of a solution on a local and a global level. Thank you. Now we'll open it up.
Thank you, Dani. You can stop sharing the screen, and I'll thank you, Dani. Thank you, Kasper, so much. I'll kind of dive in directly to picking up the questions from the chat to make the most of the time. So we have quite a few questions coming in about the applicability of the manual to various contexts. A few people have asked, Anna, Marilia, and a few others, that you're using and mentioning the EU taxonomy and asking, does this mean it could also be, or it's not applicable in the context of the Global South? Is it only meant for European countries?
Well, I think in short, this is you can say like a universal you can say relevant framework. Obviously, we have tried to limit the focus, or at least exemplify the solution space towards a European context. So I think it's a bit of both. We're using a European setting to exemplify the findings.
If I can just jump in there, we developed it with the intention of being universally relevant, as Kasper said. But of course, when you're located in a place, you're never going to see everything that's relevant to somebody who's somewhere else. So what I think from Deal's point of view would be an amazing next step is if somebody located in a country of a very different starting point and circumstance said, let me pick this up, let me adapt it to really make sense to this context, and ask what would change, what other questions or angles, different ethics would they be using. That would be an excellent test to see whether indeed it is universally framed, or it's definitely going to be enriched by somebody picking it up. And this is an open invitation to somebody to get in touch and say, we think we could actually apply this in a different way, in a very different context.
Absolutely.
So we have someone asking, may I know if the impact assessment is done proactively while designing so that corrections can be made before the project is built in reality? Anyone? Dani, maybe you can reflect on this.
I think it's really, what we found out is really, really important to start with the right goals and alignment in the project. Of course, we have to make adjustments when a building is created. When we design buildings, it's a blueprint for what we hope will happen. And then there is adjustments along the way when a building is actually put together. But if you don't start with the right objectives and the right goals, then you can't reach them. So what we've tried to do, particularly in the workshop material, is to create the right hierarchy between the things you need to integrate in the practical parts of your project: contracts, agreements between collaborators, and baseline objectives of the work you're doing. But of course, impact assessment is something that happens throughout a project. In the same way you have a financial budget that you reassess through different periods of the project, you should do the same with a carbon budget and with biodiversity targets, so that you are constantly moving between the different types of targets on a project.
Thank you. Thank you, Dani. So another question is coming from someone saying, as an architect without expertise, and I imagine I'm an architect by training as well, and a lot of architects will be coming from a similar position. As an architect without expertise in climate science, how do you suggest people like me to adopt the Doughnut principles in our daily design work? Is it imperative to learn the math and science behind sustainable construction to practice sustainable design?
I think it's I think architecture is a discipline that is expanding. I mean, of course, it's about a physical building eventually, but you need to consider the building impact. And I think as architects, you need to understand the consequences of what we do socially and environmentally. And I think this manual is giving some pretty strong tools and also a way in. I have to say, if you take every piece of information in the book, it's a lot to like just expect that anyone can just juggle with 10,000 elements, but I also think it introduces really a way to address it. So I think the points about creating a budget, consider on and off site, and also transparent social reporting. This is something that you need to do if you need to understand the consequences. I think also architecture is often also about aesthetics, but aesthetics is also being, you can say, like reinterpreted. And a building can't be beautiful if it has social negative consequences, or if it's damaging the climate. So I think those are dimensions that are the new agendas in architecture.
If I can just add to that, I think it's also really important just to be open about, like, where am I now, and take a step, learn a little something and move in the right direction through each project. It's really, really, really hard to do that if you're not engaged in the right projects. So I think as individuals, we have an option about where, to an extent, I know this is coming from a privileged seat, but we have an option about who we engage with, where we work, where we put our creativity and our efforts. And you don't need to know a lot about sustainability to know if you're working for the right types of people or the right clients or the right projects that have like the right mission in the world. So I think it's also about figuring out who you want to engage with, just as much as what the design solutions are.
And a couple of wider questions about who is this firm coming in. So who do you see as the main audiences for this manual? And is it mostly meant for single building use or for a larger scale development use?
We did have several audiences in mind writing the book. So it's very much for professionals in the built environment, but also trying to address the developers and the building owners or the urban area owners. So it can come from a central decision point, but it can also be something you use as a industry professional. And then, of course, all the knowledge and universities and the schools and professions. So it's also an educational tool. But so those were the three target groups. And also in the answer, I think it's very important that it's for urban development. It's not just about a building. It's really about a contextualized understanding of development. So it's not an object, but it's considering full context.
Mm. And picking up on a couple of questions about specific audiences, Will is asking, what suggestions do you have for how professional institutions and built environment charities could use this book? And Henning is asking how to best use the tool in education, like architecture schools, and things to consider when using them in these different contexts.
Yeah, I mean, I think education is key. If we're going to have a sustainable transition, we need to start in the educational institutions. We have to think about the assignments we create for our students. We have to think about the scope of what we ask them to solve. It's no longer just about designing something beautiful, but designing something with purpose. And I think if you are a teacher at any type of design school, you can use the manual as an eye-opener for what we can do with our creativity and what we can do with our knowledge and skills. So I think it's a really beautiful starting point for students. This is like, if this is the first thing you got at architecture school, what couldn't you find out in 4 years? It's like, for a lot of people, they might find this halfway through their career or at the end when they're teaching, for example, and they are working just teaching now and they're not in the profession. It's like, it's never too late to find the donut. But if you get it as a starting point, I just can only imagine what a beautiful future we will have. Yeah, we give it to you. It's online, use it.
Thanks, Dani. And also to add from kind of I think from the perspective of any audience of professional institutions, of built environment charities, this is the manual and the various parts of the toolkit offer, let's say, discussion pieces, as Dani says, eye-opening pieces that aren't necessarily step-by-step guides to designing a project, but also tools for thinking about what is needed to design, what should and could an ideal project look like, and therefore coming in from any angle, thinking about what are you influencing as a professional institution, what are you enabling as a legislator or municipality, etc. What can you in your field be supporting as a charity in the built environment? So I think there are many pieces, especially in the workshop tools, that can be used and taken into completely different avenues of thinking about the built environment.
Yeah.
A quick, let me see, sorry. There were a question about what is the difference, that maybe is for a quick one for Kate. What is the difference about using this and ESG?
Okay, so ESG means environmental, social, governance factors. The way that ESG is often used is we have our project, okay, we're going for it, and then let's just make sure we've thought about environmental things. No risks there, no social risks. Have we taken governance into account? The Doughnut takes those and puts them at the start. So here you are. Here is your E. It is the planet and local ecology. Here is your S. It's the social foundation of the Doughnut. And here is your G. It is the governance in how we design our enterprises. So these concepts become the first thing we do. We put environment and social integrity at the heart. We talk about not just governance, but ownership, finance, purpose, and networks. We place those at the center and then ask what kind of design of a company and an urban development and what kind of financing and contracts and legal forms could actually bring this about. So it puts them at the center and invites the whole business model to be redesigned around it.
Thanks, Kate. Another question that I think it's really relevant in thinking when we think about a built environment and Doughnut economics is from Mark asking, as architects, we tend to jump to building as the answer to every question. Does the toolkit encourage us to build or develop less rather than always, even with climate change, seeing the answer as another new building?
It's a very good question and a hot topic. I think the book presents some really heavy data. It shows that most of us in developed countries in the global north have already used our carbon budgets. We have negative shares of the global carbon budget. What this presents us with is a question: should we build new? If we do build new, what purpose should those new buildings serve? Do we have resources we already need available in the existing buildings? You know, there's a lot of things you can do before you start a new building project. And it's about prioritizing the things we need as a society over the things we need as an individual. So if building new is just building luxury penthouses as a second or third house, we probably don't need those. We maybe shouldn't be engaged in that type of work. But if building new is providing a civic function, then we should engage with it. So, you know, and it's context specific. If there are people who are not in Europe on this call, or other European countries than Denmark and the other Scandinavian countries, maybe you do have a carbon budget to build new. Maybe you do have less of a historical responsibility than we do. So I think it's also, where are you? And yeah, what are you contributing to society? It's not so nuanced of don't build anything.
Thanks, Dani. And we have, just to say and acknowledge that there are so many insightful and interesting questions coming in, and then we'll sadly not have the time to get through all of them, but we'll pick up a few more. How big of a challenge would it be to try to calculate the planetary boundary numbers for the construction industry of a particular country following the same principles from the book?
Well, that's what we also refer to as absolute sustainability, or at least that you can backtrack, you can say like a global a limit down to a national limit, down to a sector limit, down to a square meter limit. And that's what we actually are giving example on in the book, providing this, you can say like method. And using that method, you need to be aware of what are the steps you're taking. And that's where we also talk a lot about allocations. We actually are putting forward the sufficiency allocation principle, but also showing 9 other ways that kind of paints out the landscape of different principles being used. It is possible. I think the result of doing it is extremely scaring, because you might find, or you will find, that current buildings are using a factor of 10 carbon compared to what you can say like a global limit will be. Of course, it's not just one fixed number. This number will vary, but it is in that range. You are looking at dramatically lowering carbon if you need to stay with the limits of the planet. And this is necessary and needed, and I think that's one of the very strong approaches on translating planetary boundaries into actionable targets.
Thank you. Thank you, and everybody. And I think also to highlight for everybody, I know there are a lot of questions about getting more information and getting various types of information. So we're also sharing. So in the chat, you will see the links to the manual and to the toolkit. We'll make sure, I know there's been some flags that there's an error. We'll make sure that everything is working in those links as well. There will be links to the Doughnut Economics Action Lab, where we can learn a bit more widely about Doughnut economics for those who have been asking, and also about specifically local authorities and municipalities working. We do have some guides and materials for that as well. But we will also have been recording this webinar, and it will be accessible afterwards, so you can follow it, and we can see if there are ways for us to answer somehow, or as we're reposting this on DIL's platform, on Doughnut Economics Action Lab platform, we will be reposting the video of this and making it available, and seeing if we can also maybe pick up some of the many exciting questions that have come in. But we will try to keep on time, and just thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Dani and Kasper, for your presentation and for all your work. Thank you to everybody from the wider team that worked on this. We're very excited to have it outside in the world, and we invite stories of action, questions, and explorations of adapting it, of contextualizing it, of criticizing it in various different contexts across the world. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to you. You can see various members of the team as well around here, and have a good evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you are.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.